The message from my mother arrived at 9:17 on the morning of December 20. I still remember the exact time because I was standing in the kitchen with one hand around a mug of coffee and the other holding my phone when I read it for the third time. We've decided it's better if you don't come home for Christmas this year. You haven't really contributed to the family, and we don't want another uncomfortable holiday. That was it. No greeting. No explanation. Not even a love, Mom. I stared at the screen until the coffee in my mug went cold. Then another message appeared. My father had simply written, "Your mother is right. Let's keep Christmas small." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because sometimes something hurts so badly that your mind refuses to process it in the normal way. For 28 years, that house had been home. The dining room where my father carved the turkey every Thanksgiving. The staircase where my mother used to hang stocking. The little guest room at the end of the hallway where I had once painted the walls lavender when I was 16. The same house where my mother had told me, during one of the hardest years of my life, "You'll always have a place here." Now, apparently, I had contributed nothing, and therefore, I was not invited. I set my phone down. For a few seconds, I just stood there. Then I looked across the kitchen at the 3 cardboard boxes I had carefully packed the night before. One box contained old photographs. One contained documents. And the largest box contained something I had spent the last 11 months finding, paying for, preserving, and quietly protecting. Something my parents had no idea existed. Something my father would recognize immediately. Something that would change the entire meaning of that message. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call my father. Instead, I picked up my phone and sent one message to the person who had helped me keep the secret. "I'm still coming." Then I looked at the boxes, and for the first time since I was a child, I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge, because I finally understood something. They had spent years measuring my value by what I could hand them. They had forgotten that sometimes the person who gives the most is the person nobody bothers to notice. My name is Emily Carter, and this is the story of the Christmas my parents thought I had nothing to contribute. I grew up in a comfortable suburban neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio. In a 2-story brick house my parents had bought before I was born. It was never a mansion. It wasn't flashy, but to me, it felt enormous. My father, Richard, worked as an operations manager for a regional manufacturing company. He was disciplined, organized, and very proud of the fact that he had built his career without anyone's help. My mother, Linda, managed a small bookkeeping business from home. She was polished, social, and extremely concerned with appearances. Growing up, she believed there were 2 kinds of families. Families people admired, and families people felt sorry for. She would never say it that directly, of course. She preferred softer language. People remember how you present yourself. Never let others think you're struggling. Success is partly about perception. My older brother, Daniel, was 7 years older than me. He was the golden child. Not because he was perfect. He wasn't. But because my parents believed his future reflected their success. When Daniel got accepted into a good college, my father took the acceptance letter to his office and showed it to nearly everyone he worked with. When Daniel got his first corporate job, my mother hosted a dinner for 12 people. When Daniel bought his first car, my father helped with the down payment. And when Daniel got engaged to Rachel, my mother spent almost 6 months talking about the wedding. I never really resented any of it. At least, I told myself I didn't. I was the quieter child. I liked books, photography, and old houses. I would rather spend a Saturday at a flea market than at a crowded restaurant. I was the kind of person who remembered tiny details. The name of someone's dog, the date of a neighbor's birthday, the exact story behind an old photograph. My father used to tease me about it. "You were born 50 years old," he would say, and I would smile. Because when you are young, you don't realize that the same trait people praise in you can become the reason they underestimate you later. I went to college in state and studied business administration. During my junior year, my father's company went through a restructuring. He kept his job, but the stress changed him. He became quieter, more distant. My mother became obsessed with money. She started checking bank accounts at the dinner table. She would talk about retirement, property values, taxes, insurance, investments. Daniel, meanwhile, had started working for a growing consulting firm in Chicago. His salary was excellent. He dressed well. He traveled. He posted pictures from conferences and expensive restaurants. Every time he came home, my mother would introduce him with the same sentence. "This is our son, Daniel. He works in corporate strategy." Whenever anyone asked what I did, my mother would say, "Emily has a little design and administrative business." A little business. It was never just Emily works independently. It was always a little business. As though my life were a hobby. But my business was real. After college, I worked for a nonprofit that helped elderly homeowners stay in their homes by connecting them with legal aid, housing assistance, repair programs, and financial counseling. I loved the work. I didn't make a lot of money, but I saw things most people never saw. I saw elderly couples terrified that they would lose houses they had lived in for 40 years. I saw widows trying to understand paperwork they had never needed to handle before. I saw families fighting over property because nobody had planned ahead. I saw people become strangers to each other when money entered the room. And somewhere along the way, I became very good at solving problems quietly. When I was 24, my father had a minor health scare. Nothing dramatic, but it scared all of us. He had to spend a few nights in the hospital for observation. My mother called me every few hours. She didn't call Daniel. She said Daniel had an important presentation, so I drove 2 hours, stayed at the hospital, brought my father clean clothes, handled paperwork, spoke with the nurses, filled prescriptions, and slept in a chair beside his bed. When Daniel finally arrived, he came with a large bouquet of flowers. My mother cried when she saw him. "Oh, look who's here," she said. My father smiled. Daniel handed him the flowers. I remember standing in the doorway, holding a plastic grocery bag filled with my father's socks, a phone charger, and his reading glasses. My mother turned to me. "Emily, could you take those clothes home?" That was the moment I first understood that effort and recognition were not the same thing. Still, I kept trying, because that was what I had been taught. Family means showing up. So I showed up. When my parents needed help with their taxes, I helped. When my mother had trouble with her accounting software, I fixed it. When my father needed to compare insurance policies, I researched them. When their basement flooded one spring, I spent 2 days helping them clean it. When my parents decided to renovate the kitchen, I built them a spreadsheet to track costs because they were already going over budget. Daniel sent them a gift card. My mother thanked him for being thoughtful. She thanked me for being good at spreadsheets. I laughed it off. I always laughed it off. Until the year everything changed. It started with my grandfather, my mother's father. His name was Thomas Bennett. Grandpa Tom was the reason I loved old houses. He believed every house had a story. He would take me to estate sales when I was little and teach me how to recognize good wood, handmade furniture, old hardware, and things people threw away simply because they didn't understand their value. He was a patient man. He never cared whether I had the highest grades. He never cared what job I had. He cared whether I was kind. He died when I was 23. Before he passed, he gave me a small wooden box. Inside was an old brass key. I asked him what it opened. He smiled. "You'll know when it matters." I laughed because I thought he was being mysterious. After his funeral, the box disappeared into a drawer. I forgot about it. Years later, when my grandmother died, my mother inherited most of the family property, including an old farmhouse that had belonged to my grandparents. The farmhouse was about 40 minutes outside Columbus. It had been empty for years. My parents considered selling it. Daniel thought they should tear it down. My mother wanted to list it immediately. I asked if I could see it before they did anything. My father said, "Why?" "Because Grandpa loved that place." He shrugged. "It's just a property, Emily." Those words stayed with me. Just a property. To him, it was an asset. To me, it was the last place where my grandfather still felt alive. I visited the farmhouse alone. The place was in terrible condition. The roof needed work. The porch sagged. Windows were cracked. But the structure was beautiful. And in the back room, beneath a layer of dust, I found something I had never seen before. A built-in cabinet. Inside it were old papers, receipts, letters, property documents, photographs, and a handwritten note from my grandfather. It said, "Emily, if you are the one who found this, Then you are probably the only one who bothered to look. I sat on the floor and read the note twice. Then I noticed something else. There was a legal document attached to it. A property agreement. I didn't understand it at first. So I took photographs and brought them to someone I trusted from work. Her name was Margaret Lewis. She was an estate attorney who had volunteered with our nonprofit for years. Margaret examined the papers. Then she looked at me. "Emily," she said quietly, "do your parents know about this?" "Know about what?" She tapped the document. "This." It turned out the farmhouse wasn't simply an old property waiting to be sold. Years earlier, my grandfather had placed it into a small family trust. And there was something else. A provision? If the property were sold, a percentage of the proceeds would have to be distributed according to a specific inheritance structure. My grandfather had left a larger share to my mother, but he had also designated a separate trust interest for me. Not Daniel. Me. I couldn't understand why. Margaret explained that my grandfather had apparently changed his estate plan after watching how my mother and father handled financial decisions involving the family. "He may have believed you were the more responsible person," she said. I stared at the document. "But my parents own the house. They own the management rights of the property under the trust agreement. That isn't the same thing." I felt dizzy. What does this mean? It means they cannot simply sell the property and treat all the proceeds as theirs. That discovery was huge. But there was more. A second document showed that the trust had accumulated funds from an investment account attached to the property over the years. The amount wasn't enormous by wealthy family standards, but it was significant, nearly $180,000. My grandfather had created it as a long-term preservation fund for the property. And because the farmhouse was now worth much more than anyone had expected, the trust itself had become valuable. Margaret told me something else. "This is not something you should confront your parents about emotionally." "Why?" "Because if they discover this before everything is documented properly, there could be a dispute." I nodded. She advised me to do something that initially felt almost impossible. Say nothing. So I said nothing. For months. Meanwhile, my family continued behaving exactly as they always had. Daniel got promoted. My mother bragged about him. My father helped him invest in another property. Then Daniel and Rachel announced that they were expecting a baby. My mother cried with joy. She immediately started planning Christmas. The family gathering would be at my parents' house. Daniel and Rachel would stay for 4 nights. My mother even ordered a custom dining table because she wanted the perfect family Christmas. I was happy for them. I really was. But there was something else happening. My father had decided to sell the farmhouse. I found out because Margaret called me. "The listing paperwork was submitted," she said. My heart dropped. "They're selling it?" "Yes." "Can they?" "Not without addressing the trust." That was when I realized my grandfather's secret was no longer something I could quietly observe. I had to act. I spent the next few months working with Margaret to make sure everything was legally documented. There was no dramatic courtroom scene, no secret vault, no hidden fortune, just paperwork, account statements, property records, trust provisions, dates, signatures, and one very important fact. My grandfather had anticipated exactly what was happening. He knew the family might one day fight over the property. So he had structured the trust to protect it. The sale could proceed, but the distribution could not be changed simply because one family member wanted more. Then something happened that made everything personal. One evening, my mother called me. She sounded cheerful. "Emily, are you coming for Christmas?" "Of course." There was a pause. "How long are you planning to stay?" I laughed. "Mom, I have nowhere else to go." She didn't laugh. "Well, Daniel and Rachel will have the guest room." I stood still. "What?" "We just want to make it easier this year." "What does that mean?" "You can get a hotel." "A hotel?" "It's only a few nights." I felt something inside me crack. "Why?" She sighed. "Emily, don't make this difficult. I'm asking why I need a hotel in my own family home." "It isn't your home." She said it casually, but it landed like a stone. I looked around my apartment. The small bookshelves, the framed photographs, the little Christmas tree I had decorated by myself. "Mom, what are you talking about?" She lowered her voice. "Daniel has a family now. Things are different. They're expecting a baby." "Exactly. And I'm your daughter." "Nobody said you weren't. Then why am I being pushed out?" She became irritated. Because you're making everything about yourself. I almost laughed. You called me to tell me I'm not welcome. I didn't say that. You just told me to get a hotel. You're an adult. So is Daniel. That's not the point. Then what is the point? She was silent for a moment. Then she said the words that would eventually lead to the message I received on December 20. You don't really contribute much to the family, Emily. I froze. What? You're always doing things for other people. You make all these little projects. You help with things. But when it comes to the family, you haven't really built anything. I looked at the ceiling. Mom, I have spent years helping you and Dad. That's different. How? Because you're our daughter. I couldn't even respond. Then she added, Daniel has a career. He has a future. He's building a family. People respect that. And what am I doing? You know what I mean. No, I didn't. And I never would. We hung up. I sat on my couch until midnight. I cried for about 10 minutes. Then I stopped. Because something had changed. Not in them. In me. I had finally stopped asking people to recognize what they refused to see. The next week, I visited the farmhouse again. I spent the day cleaning. I opened the windows. I swept the floors. I fixed the loose handles. I hired a local contractor to repair part of the porch. And I discovered something hidden inside the old fireplace. Another envelope. Another letter. This one was dated 3 days before my grandfather died. It said, if the family ever forgets that people matter more than property, remember that the person who preserves something is often more valuable than the person who sells it. I sat beside that fireplace and cried, because for the first time, I understood why he had trusted me. Not because I was his favorite. Not because I was smarter than Daniel. Because I was willing to take care of something when there was nothing immediate to gain. I decided to protect the farmhouse. Not for revenge. For him. I used my savings to restore what I could. Then I found a local preservation organization interested in turning part of the property into a community learning space for older homeowners and families dealing with inherited property. It was exactly the kind of work my grandfather would have loved. Margaret helped me structure the proposal. A local contractor reduced his fees because he loved the idea. A retired teacher offered to volunteer. A small community foundation agreed to provide funding. And slowly, the old farmhouse began coming back to life. By November, it looked completely different. The porch had been repaired. The windows were replaced. The walls were restored. The old kitchen had been cleaned and preserved. And in the back room, I created a small archive. Photographs, letters, records, stories, everything my grandfather had saved. I never told my parents. Then, on December 10th, my father called. Emily, we need to talk about the farmhouse. My heart started beating faster. Okay, we're closing on the sale after Christmas. I remained silent. What? He asked. You're selling it after Christmas? Yes. Are you sure? Of course. You should talk to Margaret Lewis before you sign anything. There was a pause. Why? Just talk to her. His voice became sharp. Emily, why are you suddenly involving yourself in this? Because Grandpa left something that matters. Silence. Then he said, what are you talking about? I think you know. No, I don't. Then you should speak to Margaret. Emily. Dad, have you been going through our papers? No. Then what is this? It's something Grandpa left behind. Another silence. Finally, my father said, I don't have time for this. Then he hung up. 2 hours later, I received a call from Margaret. They contacted me. What happened? They want to know why I'm involved. I told her about the conversation. She sighed. We knew this day would come. Dad doesn't know about the trust, does he? He may not have understood it. Does Mom? I don't know. Then Margaret said something that made my stomach drop. There's another issue. What? The property sale documents they submitted contain a proposed distribution schedule that does not include your trust interest. I closed my eyes. So they're trying to sell it without telling me. That appears to be the case. I felt angry, but not surprised. That night, I made a decision. I would go home for Christmas. Not because they wanted me. Because I was done disappearing to make other people comfortable. I packed the boxes, photographs, documents, and something else. A framed picture of my grandfather standing on the farmhouse porch with me when I was 8. That was what I planned to bring. Not the legal papers, not the money, Not anything dramatic. The frame. Because I wanted my father to remember who the house belonged to before it became an asset. Then came the message. You haven't really contributed to the family. I read it again and decided I would answer with action instead of words. On Christmas Eve, I drove to my parents' house. I arrived at 3:40 inches the afternoon. Snow was falling lightly. The neighborhood looked exactly like my childhood. Garlands, lights, wreaths, cars parked along the street. I sat in my car for almost 5 minutes. Then I lifted the box containing the photograph. I walked to the front door. Before I could knock, the door opened. My mother stood there. She looked surprised. Emily, Merry Christmas, Mom. She stared at the box. What is that? A gift. She stepped aside reluctantly. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon, roasted vegetables, and pine. Daniel was standing near the fireplace. Rachel sat on the couch. My father was in the dining room arranging glasses. When he saw me, his face changed. Not anger, not happiness, something else. Concern, because he recognized the farmhouse photo frame sticking out of the box. Where did you get that? I looked at him. Grandpa gave it to me. He said nothing. My mother whispered, What's going on? I set the box down. I brought something for the family. Daniel crossed his arms. Why did you come? I looked at him. Mom told me not to. He glanced at our parents. My mother looked embarrassed. My father looked angry. Then my mother said, You really shouldn't have come. I nodded. You're right. She looked relieved. Until I continued. But I'm not here to stay. What does that mean? My father asked. It means I'm here to return something that belongs to this family. I opened the box. I lifted out the photograph. My father stared at it. His face went pale. It was an old picture. Grandpa Tom standing on the farmhouse porch. I was beside him, wearing a red winter coat. My father was in the background, younger, smiling. And on the porch behind us was a wooden sign. Bennett Family Farm. My father whispered, Where did you get this? Grandpa gave it to me. I know that. He looked at me. But why are you bringing it now? Because I thought you should remember what you're selling. Daniel stepped forward. We're not selling the family. I turned to him. You are selling the farmhouse. It's a property. That's what Dad said. My mother sighed. Emily, please don't start. I'm not starting anything. I reached into the box and took out a folder. My father immediately recognized the name on it. Margaret Lewis. He looked at me. What is this? The legal paperwork for the Bennett Family Trust. The room went silent. My mother sat down. Daniel's expression changed. Rachel looked between everyone, confused. My father stared at the folder. I thought that trust was closed. It isn't. How do you know? Because Grandpa left it in writing. My mother stood. You've known about this? For almost a year. And you never told us? No. Why? Because every time money was involved, I watched you treat people differently. She looked offended. That is ridiculous. Is it? My father stepped forward. Emily, what exactly are you saying? I'm saying the farmhouse can't be sold the way you planned. He grabbed the folder. He opened it. His eyes moved quickly across the page, then slower. Then he sat down. What is this? The trust agreement. He kept reading. Daniel leaned over his shoulder. My mother asked, How much? I looked at her. That's the first question? She looked away. I answered anyway. There's roughly $180,000 in the preservation account. Daniel inhaled sharply. My father kept reading. The room was silent. Finally, he looked up. You have an interest in this? Yes. How much? A separate trust share. How much? I'm not telling you because I want money. Then why are you telling us? Because you were about to sell something you didn't fully control. My father stared at me. Then something unexpected happened. He started crying, not loudly, not dramatically, just one tear, then another. I had never seen my father cry except at funerals. He looked at the photograph. Grandpa. Me? The porch. Then he whispered. He knew. I didn't understand. Knew what? He knew exactly what I would do. My mother looked irritated. What are you talking about? He didn't answer. He stood and walked toward the hallway. Dad? He disappeared into his office. A minute later, he came back holding an old envelope. I found this years ago. He handed it to me. It was from Grandpa. My hands trembled. I opened it. Inside was a letter addressed to my father. It said, "Richard, I know you think success means owning more. I hope someday you learn that success also means leaving something better than you found it." My father covered his face. Nobody spoke. Then Daniel said quietly, "Why didn't you tell us about this?" My father lowered his hands. "Because I was ashamed." That surprised everyone. He continued, "I wanted to sell the property because I thought it would make our retirement easier. I thought Emily was getting emotional about an old house." He looked at me. I was wrong. My mother crossed her arms. "This is getting ridiculous." My father turned toward her. "No." She looked stunned. He stood. "We are not selling the farmhouse." She stared at him. "What?" "We're not selling it. But the buyers." I said no. Daniel looked worried. "Dad, we already signed paperwork." "We haven't closed." My mother began pacing. "You can't just change everything because Emily found some old documents." My father looked at her. "It isn't because Emily found documents." His voice became steady. "It's because we forgot what we were supposed to be protecting." I felt tears in my eyes. But there was still one thing I had to say. "Dad." He looked at me. "I need you to hear something." He nodded. "When Mom said I contributed nothing, that hurt." My mother looked down. "I know I don't have Daniel's salary. I know. I know I don't have the career you're proud of. I know. And I know I haven't made the kind of money you wanted me to make." My voice cracked. "But I have spent years showing up for this family." Nobody interrupted. I showed up when Dad was in the hospital. My father closed his eyes. "I helped Mom with her business." My mother's face tightened. "I helped with the basement flood." "I handled the paperwork when Grandma passed." "I spent months protecting Grandpa's property." I took a breath. "And I never once asked you to pay me for being your daughter." My mother sat down. "I didn't know," she whispered. "That's the problem." I looked at her. "You didn't notice because I wasn't asking for applause." Silence. Daniel finally spoke. "Emily, I owe you an apology." I looked at him. "For what?" "For letting Mom and Dad make everything about me." I smiled sadly. "You didn't make them do anything. I still benefited." I nodded. "Yes." He swallowed. "I was selfish. I didn't argue." Rachel placed a hand on his arm. My father walked toward me. I thought he was going to hug me. Instead, he stopped a few feet away. "I'm sorry." Those two words were more powerful than any dramatic speech could have been. I had waited years to hear them. But I realized something. An apology does not erase history. It simply gives you the chance to stop repeating it. I nodded. "Thank you." Then my father asked, "What did you do with the farmhouse?" I hesitated. "What do you mean?" "You said you'd been protecting it." I looked at him. "I restored it." His eyebrows rose. "How?" "I partnered with a local preservation group." "You did this yourself?" "With help." He stared at me. "How much did that cost?" "I used my savings." My father shook his head. "You spent your own money on this?" "Yes." "Why?" I looked at the photograph of Grandpa. "Because somebody had to care." My father turned away. He was crying again. This time, my mother cried too. Not because she had lost money, because she finally understood what she had failed to see. The farmhouse was not just a property. It was part of the family, and I had been the one person protecting it while everyone else was deciding what it was worth. The next morning, something unexpected happened. My father asked me to drive with him to the farmhouse. Just the two of us. I agreed. We drove in silence for most of the trip. When we arrived, the snow had covered the yard. The old porch looked beautiful. My father stood at the bottom of the steps. Then he looked at me. "You really did all this?" "Yes." He touched the railing. "This is the same wood. Most of it." He walked inside. The first thing he saw was the archive room. Photographs of Grandpa, family records, the old letters, a display explaining the property's history. There was even a small table where local families could come and learn about estate planning and property preservation. My father picked up one photograph. It showed him and Grandpa working together in the yard. He stared at it for a long time. "I forgot this day." "I didn't." He smiled faintly. "You remember everything. I remember what matters." He put the picture down. Then he said, "I spent years thinking Daniel was going to build our legacy. I said nothing, and I never realized you already were." I looked at him. "Dad." "No." He shook his head. Let me finish. He took a breath. I thought legacy meant money, promotions, houses, business cards. I thought people respected you because of what you owned. He looked around. You understood it better than I did. I didn't know what to say. He walked to the window. Your grandfather would be proud. That sentence broke me. I started crying. My father turned, and this time he hugged me. It was not a perfect hug. It was awkward. He held me tightly for a few seconds, then pulled away. But it was real, and real mattered more. Over the following months, the family changed. Not instantly. Real life doesn't work that way. My mother struggled the most. She had spent years believing that financial contribution was the clearest measure of value. Now she had to confront the fact that she had been wrong. She apologized to me several times. The first apology felt formal. The second sounded more genuine. The third happened unexpectedly in the kitchen. She was making coffee. I was helping her organize some documents. She looked at me and said, I think I was jealous of you. I almost dropped the folder. Why? Because you were content. I stared at her. She continued, You didn't need people to admire you. She laughed softly. I always needed that. I didn't know what to say. Then she added, When you said you were going to stay away from Christmas, I thought you would just accept it. Why? Because you always did. That one sentence explained everything. I had trained my family to expect silence from me, not because they were cruel every second, because I kept making it easy for them to overlook me. That was my part in the pattern. My mother reached for my hand. I'm sorry. This time, I believed her. Daniel changed too. He stopped letting our parents pay for everything. He created a savings plan for his own family. He began contributing to the preservation project. Not because I asked him, because he wanted to. One afternoon, he called me. I want to ask you something. Okay. Would you be willing to help me teach my daughter about Grandpa? I smiled. Of course. Would you show her the farmhouse? Absolutely. He laughed. She's going to love it. She will. There was a pause. Then he said, Emily? Yeah? I'm proud of you. I closed my eyes. Thank you. The legal situation surrounding the trust was resolved properly. The property was not sold. The preservation fund remained intact. A portion of the trust was distributed according to the original agreement, and the farmhouse became a community heritage center. Not a huge one, not famous, but meaningful. People came there to learn about old properties, estate planning, and preserving family history. My work grew. I eventually left the nonprofit and started a small consulting practice helping families organize inherited property documents and navigate complicated transitions. For the first time, my mother introduced me differently. This is my daughter, Emily. She runs her own consulting business. She said it with pride. Little. No apology. Just pride. And my father? He became one of my biggest supporters. He would tell his friends about the farmhouse. He would say, My daughter saved that place. I always corrected him. She didn't save it. I would smile. We all saved it. Christmas came again the following year. This time, my mother called me in November. Emily? Yes? I want to ask you something. Okay. Would you come home for Christmas? I smiled. I was planning to. She laughed. Good. Then she added, Bring the old photograph. I looked at the framed picture of Grandpa sitting on my bookshelf. The one from the farmhouse? Yes. Why? Because I want it over the fireplace. I was quiet. Then she said, I want everyone to see where we came from. On Christmas Eve, I walked into my parents' house carrying the photograph. Daniel was there with Rachel and their daughter. My father was standing near the tree. My mother opened the door. She smiled. Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas. She hugged me. Then she took the photograph from my hands. For a moment, she just looked at it. Then she placed it above the fireplace. Grandpa stood there in the middle of our family, smiling from decades ago, watching everything. My father walked over. He looked at the picture, then looked at me. You know, he said, I still remember the day you found that box. I smiled. You remember? Of course. He shook his head. I just wish I had paid attention sooner. I looked at my family. Daniel was holding his little girl. Rachel was laughing. My mother was setting plates on the table. The house was warm. The lights were glowing. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was standing at the edge of my own family. I felt like I belonged, not because I had proven my worth, not because I had brought money, not because I had saved a property, because I had finally learned something much more important. You cannot earn love from people by constantly proving that you deserve it, and you cannot force people to appreciate what they have trained themselves not to see. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop begging for recognition and start building a life that reflects your own values. My parents thought I contributed nothing because they had measured contribution in dollars, status, and visible success. But I had brought something different to that Christmas. I brought history. I brought responsibility. I brought truth. And, more than anything, I brought proof that the quiet person in the room may be carrying more than anyone realizes. My father once told me that success meant building something people could point to. I think he was right, just not in the way he originally meant. Success is not always the big house. It is not always the impressive title. It is not always the expensive car parked in the driveway. Sometimes success is preserving a family story. Sometimes it is showing up when nobody is watching. Sometimes it is fixing what other people walk past. Sometimes it is choosing not to become bitter after being overlooked. And sometimes, the greatest kind of revenge is not watching the people who hurt you lose. It is watching them finally understand what they almost lost. That Christmas changed my family, but more importantly, it changed me. I stopped measuring myself by my parents' expectations. I stopped apologizing for having a different life. I stopped thinking that being useful meant being invisible. And I stopped believing that love had to be earned through endless sacrifice. Years later, when my own niece asked me about the photograph over the fireplace, I told her about Grandpa Tom. I told her he believed every house had a story. She asked me what the story of our family was. I looked at my brother, at my parents, at the photograph, and then I told her the truth. Our family learned that people are worth more than what they can contribute. She thought about that for a moment. Then she said, "Is that why you saved the house?" I smiled. "No." "Why then?" I looked at the photograph of my grandfather. Because somebody had to remember. And maybe that was the real gift I brought home that Christmas. Not the documents, not the trust, not the farmhouse, not the money. The gift was making my family remember. Remember who they were. Remember where they came from. Remember that the person sitting quietly at the edge of the table might be carrying the very thing holding the family together. My parents once told me I couldn't come home for Christmas because I contributed nothing. By the end of that night, my father understood something he had spent years missing. I had never been the child who contributed the least. I had simply been the child who gave without keeping score. And when he finally saw what I brought, he finally saw me.